Take almost any list of who has the most money, followers, citations, even friends, and it always comes out looking the same. A tiny handful at the top with almost everything, and a giant crowd at the bottom with almost nothing. We usually explain this with a single word: greed. But what if the real reason the rich get richer is closer to a law of nature, a kind of gravity, written into the mathematics itself? And what if that math also tells us exactly when the rich do not stay rich? First, notice how universal the pattern is. The distribution of personal wealth looks like this. But so does the size of cities, the number of subscribers on YouTube, the sales of books, the citations of scientists. In every case, a few enormous winners and a very long tail of everyone else. When the same shape shows up in this many unrelated places, that's a hint we're not looking at 100 separate stories. We're looking at one underlying force. And it is not the shape most people picture. When we imagine normal, we picture a bell curve, most people in the middle, a few at each extreme, like human height. But wealth doesn't work like that at all. Wealth follows what's called a power law, a long, heavy tail where the top pulls impossibly far away. Over a century ago, the economist Vilfredo Pareto noticed that about 80% of the land in Italy was owned by about 20% of the people, and that the same lopsided ratio showed up almost everywhere he looked. So what's the force behind it? The first piece is the oldest idea in finance. Money makes money. If you're wealthy, you have a surplus you can invest. And that surplus earns a return, year after year, while you sleep. The economist Thomas Piketty put a sharp point on this. He argued that the return on capital, which he calls R, has historically tended to be larger than the growth rate of the whole economy, G. And whenever R is bigger than G, the people who own capital pull steadily away from the people who only earn wages. Wages are earned once. Capital pays forever. The second piece is about connection, and it has a biblical name, the Matthew effect, from the line, "To those who have, more will be given." Scientists who study networks found a rule they call preferential attachment. When a network grows, new connections tend to latch onto the nodes that are already the most connected. A popular video gets recommended more, so it gets more popular. A big city offers more jobs, so more people move there, so it offers more jobs. The first advantage snowballs, and mathematically, that snowballing is exactly what produces the lopsided power law we just saw. But here is the result that genuinely stunned me, because it strips away every excuse. Imagine a game. Everyone starts with exactly the same amount of money. Then we pick two people at random and let them make a small, completely fair trade, a coin flip, 50-50, and the amount at stake is only ever a slice of whatever the poorer of the two can afford, so no one can be wiped out in a single go. It is, by any definition, a perfectly fair market. Watch what happens as they trade. At first it's just noise, a few people ahead, a few behind, pure luck. But the luck starts to stick. The wealth begins pooling toward the top, and the shape forming in front of you should look familiar. It's the power law again, emerging on its own, out of nothing but fair coin flips. And if we let it run long enough, it doesn't reach some balanced middle. It collapses into this. One person ends up holding essentially all of the wealth, and everyone else is left with crumbs. Total oligarchy, from a perfectly fair game. Mathematicians studying this yard sale model proved something remarkable. Any market where every trade is fair, giving both sides the same expected return, will still drive itself toward maximum inequality. The natural resting state of a free market, left completely alone, is that one person has everything. The only thing that ever stops it is redistribution. Why does a fair game do this? Because wealth is multiplicative. Losing 20% hurts your future more than gaining 20% helps it. Lose 20 and then gain 20, and you're still behind where you started. Repeat that tiny asymmetry across billions of transactions, and wealth flows relentlessly uphill. That's the gravity. Compounding pulls, networks pull, and even fair trades pull, all in the same direction. And there's one more pull, this time at the bottom, because being poor is expensive. The author Terry Pratchett captured it as the boots theory. A rich man buys one $50 pair of boots that lasts 10 years. A poor man can only afford $10 boots that leak and fall apart, so he keeps buying them again and again, and ends up spending more over those 10 years while still having wet feet. Real life is full of this. Overdraft fees, payday loans, no ability to buy in bulk, renting instead of owning. The poor pay a surcharge on almost everything, which makes it that much harder to ever climb out. So the pull is real, and it's mathematical. But now for the honest other half, because the slogan "the rich get richer" hides a myth. It suggests the same people stay on top forever, and that part is mostly false. There's an old saying, found in almost every culture: shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations. Wealth built by one generation is very often gone by the third. Studies of thousands of wealthy families put it starkly. Around 70% of family fortunes are lost by the second generation, and about 90% by the third. Even at the very top of the 400 richest Americans in 1982, only 34 were still on that list by 2014. The tide lifts wealth as a whole, but individual fortunes are far more fragile than we think. And there's a second thing the slogan gets wrong. The rich get richer, and the poor get poorer treats those as one fact, but they're 2 separate questions. Look at the last few decades. Relative inequality did widen. The share of wealth held by the top 1% climbed. And yet, at the very same time, the fraction of humanity living in extreme poverty fell dramatically, from around 35% in 1990 to about 11%. The gap grew wider, and the floor rose higher. Both things are true at once. The poor, in absolute terms, mostly did not get poorer, even as the distance to the top stretched out. So, fact or myth? The honest answer is, it's a tug of war. On one side, wealth's gravity, compounding, preferential attachment, the fair trade condensation we watched, and the surcharge of being poor, all pulling wealth up. On the other side, the counterforces. Disruption that topples old fortunes, heirs who fritter them away, new people breaking through, and, most reliably, deliberate redistribution pulling the other way. The rich getting richer isn't a conspiracy, and it isn't destiny. It's a force, and forces can be pushed against. Which raises the real question: what actually bends the curve? The yard sale math is blunt about it. In that model, the only thing that ever halts the slide into oligarchy is redistribution. In the real world, that means taxing capital and inheritance, not just wages. It means strong public goods, schools and healthcare, that build wealth-generating ability at the bottom. It means antitrust, to stop the biggest hubs from swallowing everything. And it means giving ordinary people a way to own assets and earn real returns, instead of only selling their hours. Inequality, it turns out, is less a fate than a dial. And these are the hands on the dial. And what does all of this mean for you, personally? Here's the quiet twist. The very same gravity that concentrates wealth at the top is a force you can put on your own side. The single most important shift is to get onto the R side of the equation, to own assets that earn a return, not only to sell your time for a wage. Start that compounding as early as you possibly can, because the first dollar of capital is both the hardest to get and the most valuable you'll ever have. And steer around the poverty is expensive traps, the fees and the high-interest debt that quietly drain you. None of this is financial advice. It's just the logic of the same math, aimed in your favor. So the next time you hear that the rich just keep getting richer, you'll know it's neither a simple truth nor a simple lie. It's gravity. A real mathematical pull that even a perfectly fair world can't escape on its own. But gravity isn't destiny. We build bridges and fly planes precisely because we understand the force we're working against. The only real question was never whether wealth flows uphill. It's how hard we choose to push the other way. So tell me in the comments, should we push back? And how hard? This has been the AHA method. If this made something click, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.